to the Watchful Citizen. I'm your host for today's show. My name is Joshua Cramer. This has been brought to you, or is going to be brought to you, by the Lancaster County Democrats Public Relations Committee. Before I get started with our guests today, I wanted to just take a minute to send our condolences to the families of Dr. Hank Balters and friends. He was a longtime volunteer on this show, and he passed away the last couple weeks. Well, today I have with me Amy Miller and Jill Francke, and they are both from Nebraskans Against the Death Penalty. And if you actually watch this show on a regular basis, we've kind of had a series of people over the last several months come on the show and talk about the death penalty. We thought that it was fitting around the holiday time to go ahead and bring that topic up again, and also with our legislative session beginning on January 9th. So we have Amy and Jill with us. Before I get too far into this, do you want to tell us why you're here today representing the organization and perhaps your roles within the organization?
Sure. I'm chair of Nebraskans Against the Death Penalty. It's a small nonprofit organization with the sole mission to try to abolish the death penalty. So although we're a statewide organization, have a large volunteer board, I'm here representing Nebraskans Against the Death Penalty along with my fellow board member, Jill Francke.
Yep, and I'm a new member of the board, just recently involved, and have been an activist in Lincoln for some time. I'm just really starting to work on this issue, since it is kind of a hot issue in the state right now.
You might think that because we have Nebraskans Against the Death Penalty, that there could be maybe a group or an organization on the other side of the issue. Do you have people that you work directly? Is there Nebraskans for the death penalty?
There isn't, and this is one of the interesting things. Every year during the legislative session, whenever there's been a death penalty bill that's come up for debate, the question is, who will be our opponents? There's usually a few individual citizens who choose to come forward and testify that they believe that death is an appropriate punishment. And otherwise, you get a lot of people that want to stay in a neutral but opposition position, where they'll say, well, we represent law enforcement, or we represent prosecutors, county attorneys, and we believe that the death penalty may be an appropriate deterrent for crime. But at the same time, they don't want to commit themselves to being for the death penalty. They want to characterize themselves as being tough on criminals, tough on making sure that society is better. It is not an issue that you would think. There's not a group out there, people for the electrocution of other human beings, and I think that points out that this is a debate that, when brought down to its very basics, it's hard to position yourself as for the death of another human being once you characterize it that way.
Jill, could you reflect a little bit about why does it seem that the default opinion, that meaning there's no outside organization working for the death penalty, why is it that we have the death penalty if nobody's really out there advocating for it?
It seems to me, especially in a place like Nebraska where it's just not used that often, a lot of people don't think about it very often. In fact, when I first started getting involved, and my mom called and she said, so why are we against the death penalty? I've never really thought about this. And I really think that's the viewpoint that a lot of people have, is we don't do it that often. I don't really need to think about it. And also it's just the traditional way that things have been dealt with. It's been here for so long that people think that it needs to stay there. They don't really think about making that big change of taking it away. So I think mostly it's just people aren't really confronted with it very often and don't sit around and think about it. That's changed a lot, though, I think, in the last year or so.
Well, if there are people sitting out there watching this show, and maybe we've started to get their blood boiling a little bit about the whole death penalty debate, it's obviously very emotional sometimes for people, or perhaps they want to get involved, or on one side or the other. Why do we care if it's not used very much? I mean, what's the significance? What do we have, like 10 or 11 people on death row?
Nebraska currently has 10 people on death row, and I think that there is such a range of reasons why someone might say this is an issue that I want to take a stance against. For many people, it comes from a basic philosophical perspective that death and killing is wrong, and that if you have a pro-life attitude, the death penalty certainly does not jive with that. For others, and for myself particularly, it's really driven by the inequities of the system. People who are not white are so much more likely to face the death penalty than anyone else, that when you look at our death row here in Nebraska, only 10 men sit on death row. Half of them are people of color. But in the general population of Nebraska, we have 10%, maybe 9% people of color in the whole state. So it's just such a stark, glaring inequity that we are executing poor people and people of color and men rather than women. There are certainly women who are serving life without parole at the York Correctional Center for Women who have committed terrible, heinous crimes against multiple people, and we have not had a single woman on death row in Nebraska for the last century. So there's so many reasons to come at it, whether it's social economic justice, whether it's racial justice, whether it's gender disparity, or whether it's just simply that killing is wrong. One of those is likely to be something you can grapple with, and it brings different people to the table. Jill and I were talking on the way over about this really is an issue where you see very unusual people around the table. You have very young activists who are interested in direct action that are just vibrant and eccentric people, if I may characterize that segment of the population. We have nuns, we have retired professors, we have scientists. I mean, you have a strong body of religious people who are interested in abolishing the death penalty. And then you've got 20-year-old and 16-year-old kids who want to take to the streets and march on the issue too. And those are not groups you see come together very often.